Hi folks, you're Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to look at the myth that's doing the rounds, that anti-whiteism and that anti-straight white male, anti-whiteism and discrimination in areas of employment and promotion, and whether it be in business or government or so on, that's only really been around for 10 years, maybe 12 years or so. Is really so the myth goes that it was during the time of Obama that it really was it took hold, and so it's been a fairly recent thing. So people who are the so-called Gen Z and this sort of thing, people say under the age of 35 are the ones that are primarily men under the age of 35, or say today are between the age of early 20s to mid 30s, have been particularly impacted. And this discrimination against men, against white people, wasn't really around years ago. Now, I just want to set the record straight on that. When I first sort of went to the United States, and I was only a young guy, and again, I sort of fell between the cracks because they needed someone to sort of go out and do a lot of work. So none of the guys that would normally grab the international travel, none of them wanted to go because there's too much work. So I ended up getting gigs to travel to the US and elsewhere, only because it was hard work and no one else wanted to do it. And I was multilingual. That helped as well. So anyway, when I first went to the United States, I noticed that it's just IT, information technology, computer type stuff, really back in the day. I'll use that as a broad umbrella term, but I noticed when I go into the US, I was quite surprised that they were hiring companies, companies I was doing business with were hiring these minorities that sort of didn't really have any work to do. They sort of just hung around and they were there almost like adornments or for show or window dressing. And I wondered what that was about, because in Australia, you had to actually have a job. You had to do something, build something, create something, deliver something, produce something. And now, sure, there was always, the chairman of the board's wastrel nephew or cousin or something that was given a do-nothing gig, but very, very few of those. There's not many super rich, influential people around. So you don't have too much of that going on. But this was something very different. And so I asked the CEO about it, and I wasn't senior enough really at the time where I'd sort of get much interaction with the CEO, but he decided he was going to sort of size me up and check me out, and so he took me out for I think it was a lunch or a dinner, and he would have been twice my age. I was rather nervous. I remember being rather nervous and overawed by the CEO's taking me out for lunch. But I was had enough sort of wherewithal to ask the question: why are these? There are so many black people and minorities and people who seem to have not the slightest clue what they're doing. Why are they there? Why do you have these people? And I thought maybe there was it was like an intern program or something like that. And, but he was quite forthright. He said, no. He said, look, a lot of our money comes from government contracts. 50% of our revenues come from government contracts. And in order to bid for government business, whether it's state government or federal government or local government, particularly state and local government, I've got to have a certain amount of minority. 30% of the employees have to be, the proverbial black lesbian. Otherwise, I can't bid for this business. And they're quite heavy-handed about it. Angry sort of ideological fanatics. I'm paraphrasing that wasn't his language, but angry ideological fanatics can turn up, other black lesbians, and that they do audits, as in personnel or human resource audits, and they want to see all these minorities, and you had to have minorities. They had to be either black or other minorities where English wasn't their first language. So say Hispanics, for example, or you had to have minorities like lesbians, homosexuals, and so on. Particularly lesbians that weren't white. So there was a heavy emphasis on on that sort of stuff. Jewish lesbians were highly prized, so that would give you a lot of diversity points. But anyway, the thing about it was you had to have these minorities. You just couldn't bid for the business, and if you were bidding for the business and falsely claiming to have these minorities on the payroll, the fines were quite heavy, and you could be blacklisted for 10 years or something for bidding on other government business. So it was treated quite seriously, and again, they could do these audits at any time, and did do, according to him anyway, the CEO guy. So he said, look, I just got to do it. Now this was in the early mid 1980s, around there, mid 1980s. I'm only a punk ass kid, so I was wow, that's crazy. Now I traveled to other parts in the United States. That was New York or up the Northeast. Now I traveled to other parts of the United States, like say Texas, and it wasn't as rigid around there, but they still had some requirements. You had to show that you were at least in good faith, hiring some minority. So in a company of 100 people, I think I'm using hundreds as a round number, but this particular company employed, 2 black guys, a Hispanic, 2 Hispanics, and apparently he got extra bonus points if he hired a minority, like a Hispanic or a black guy who had a criminal background. Apparently he got more bonus points for that. So he did the absolute minimum, and he didn't give them any job to do. They were just there. Or one of them did some. One of them was working, and she also acted as an interpreter for Hispanic people. So she actually did do work, but she'd be the only one, and the rest of them were sort of, again, just there for window dressing. But again, it comes back to he had to hire them, otherwise he couldn't go for government contracts, and that again was a big part. Now the government progressively since then and to this day has taken up a bigger and bigger share of the economy. Government contracts. There are many big businesses, big international business, that 100% of their revenues come from government contracts. And so the government's taken a gradually and progressively larger proportion of the total economy. And in return for getting government contracts, you have to do these affirmative action DEI things. And so this was happening in the United States. Now, probably a little bit later in the 1980s, but not much later, the company I worked for, we got a new CEO who had worked in, he's an Australian guy, but he'd worked in America for a couple of years. And he was very much part of this inner city sort of, his wife was this academic, inner city, gender studies type academic chick. I don't think she did gender studies, but something in sociology. And they had this inner city sort of mentality, which even then was sort of heading as progressive. But he'd worked in the US for a couple of years. And no, I'd known him had known of him really sort of before he went to America. And he seemed to be pretty much just another guy. But when he came back from America, his head, he wasn't that bright a guy. I mean, he was a bit of a stooge, actually. I mean, don't know how fucking guy. But anyway, he came back with views on affirmative, what today we would call affirmative action and DEI hiring, and the idea was getting rid of straight white males. Now, in order to make way for this diversity, you had to get rid of the straight white males, because it was nearly all straight white males back in the day. It was how there's the companies I worked for, you'd maybe get the odd 1 or 2 diversity hire, and even then that was because of some particular diversity drive they were going on for some obscure reason that was hard to fathom. But even in sort of 1980, when I was 20 or something like that, I got this. My early 80s, but I don't think I was 21 even at the time, but I got a gig just to temporarily look after the training department in this organization for trainees, and they're because in those days they had like cadetships and you had to pass exams, and it was all very serious. And I mean, I don't think I have any of that today, but I was told by the one of the, I can't remember, he was some senior manager or director or something of the company, that that they wanted to have a diversity drive. They wanted more women in management. So he didn't say why, he just said that's what they wanted. And so he said, look, with the exams coming up, because I was only there temporarily as department, and it was while the exams were on, the cadetship trainee exams were on. And so he said, look, I want you to pass all the women, all the girls, and they were young. I mean, they're all between the age of, say, I don't know, 20 to 25, which is the age group I was in fact. So he said, you have to pass all the girls, doesn't matter. So I sort of queried this and said, well, I mean, if they, all of them, you have to pass all of them. Like, even if they don't hand in their papers or something, like, I mean, what if they're off sick or something? Like, listen, Billy Bob, and he was quite stern, you'll be looking for another job if you don't do what I tell you to do. You will pass every one of them. I said, okay, what about the boys? Oh, no, fail them. If they flunk, fail them, but you'll pass all the girls. So, and then that was back then. So there were already those things starting to come in. Now, whether the reason was they could pay people less money, or they were more amenable, they could be pushed around more easily, or they just wanted the optics, it doesn't really matter, but that was it. Now, coming back to America, the CEO I was having lunch with, he said, look, I've got two options. I can walk away from all government. This is because he's got to hire, make diversity. I can walk away from all government business. He said, which would be tough. I'd have to reposition the whole company, and a lot of hard work, a lot of hard slog. The board of directors would probably throw me out before I could complete that. So I've got two options. I can increase the price of what we offer to offset the cost of having all these do-nothing, layabout, parasitic minorities. So I've got to increase the price of the product or the services, because I've got to take on all this extra payroll that I don't need, and they produce nothing. So I've got to put the price up, or I've got to get rid of white people. Now, I might get rid of the least qualified or least competent or least productive white people. I might do that. But he said that those are my only options. And at the time, he thought he couldn't put up the price. So he had to, and brazenly, well, not brazenly, he just openly admitted the reality of it. I've got to get rid of white people to make way for these minorities. But the white people I'm getting rid of were productive people, maybe not super productive nonetheless. And I'm replacing them with people who are much less productive, which this puts more work onto the shoulders of the white people who are productive, who are left behind. Now, this was the same. Now, this guy came back from America filled with these ideas of it was the right way to go. And again, he had that sort of glazed-eyed look of the ideological fanatic when he came back. He came in as the CEO. And within seconds of him walking in the door, he was throwing white people out, straight white males out, and hiring his flame. Now, he had this thing about hiring snot-nosed girls from private schools, and that was his thing. If you came from a low-class school out in the back, no chance. So there was like a clutch, a small, which his wife had been to, I think. He'd been there was a small clutch of upmarket girls' private schools, and he would only hire girls who'd come from those schools. But they were just entitled flunkies. They weren't people who were doing any work, and he was giving them the jobs for diversity purposes and nothing else. But he was getting rid of productive straight white males to fill these roles. Now, he was a strange guy. Some years later, I discovered that he was one of these guys that used to go to these bondage and discipline sort of places where girls dressed in leather with whips would give him the once over while he was tied to a chair or something like that. And he and his wife were swingers and very much into the B&D type scene. And so those perversions and strange attitudes and views was something I'm not surprised, actually. He had this thing, when a girl would walk into the room, he would change. When he was talking to a man, he was a big tough dude. When a woman would walk in the room, he'd go, "Oh, hi, oh, hello, aren't you saying hello to me today?" And he had this very, very sort of pathetic, wimpy sort of demeanor that would just come over him as soon as a woman walked into the room. Now, the women that knew him or aware of him, would instantly have this look of, complete victory or triumph on their faces when you do, like, "Good boy, do I control him?" type look. But that's very much he was like. Now, there was another CEO that at a different firm who had the same thing. He'd been in America for a few years doing something. He studied at Harvard, this guy. And he came back with the same thing, this maniacal desire to get rid of white men and replace them with anyone that wasn't a straight white man. He didn't care. And he also didn't care about the collateral damage, as in replacing quality people with low quality people. And he didn't seem to care about that. And it struck me as remarkably odd. But so I was in constant battles with him, trying to prevent his destructive ideology. Just hire black people, just make sure anyone you hire is not a straight white male as in itself. And again, this is in the 80s. So this is something that goes back quite a while. And I didn't really care who got hired or didn't get hired or who was put in what role. I didn't get, as long as they were, at least plausibly qualified to be hired or to be promoted or rewarded, and that just didn't happen. And qualified people, maybe they weren't the best qualified in the whole universe, but qualified people were being got rid of just because they were straight white males and replaced by people that weren't straight white males. Something that's continued to this very day, and that you see everywhere. So I wanted to do this video just to point out that this process of replacing the competent with the incompetent has been going on for a long time. I mean, just another one's an organisation that just suddenly they had a lot of quite competent people, I thought. Then just suddenly they won national government contracts. I don't know how, but they won national government contracts, and they were given. They were the government, the federal government at the time. It's in Australia. The federal government, okay, so we'll let you have all this business, which was a lot. They were, the preferred supplier federally, and then that was worth, gazillions of dollars in sales. And but the deal was, no, you got to go hardcore DEI and affirmative action. So white people just were disappearing en masse, and as long as somebody wasn't a straight white male, they would get a job. And they got this angry lesbian Jewish lady to be the director of HR, and gave her this brief, which I think she had done without any prompting anyway. And she went about it with gusto. There was hardly any straight white males. Anyway, they suffered sort of quite a lot because of it. And so interesting, the CEO, who by the way was a straight white male, he came to me and said, "Look, Billy Bob, I'd like to hire you and like you to come and work for us. We've got some holes and gaps and problems we can't seem to solve. Can you come and work for us?" Or he phrased it differently. He says, "You come and work for me." So it's a public company, for fuck's sake. What's this come and work for me bullshit? I didn't say that, but so he was that, and he's running me through. And I remember asking him, so, "Well, look, you've got so much dead weight here, so much affirmative action, so much DEI. I mean, no wonder you can't get anything done." And he shrugged his shoulders. "Well, that's just the reality of the world as it is. Without that affirmative action, the government won't give me the contracts. They'll just give it to someone else, some other outfit. So I just got to go along with it, and that's that." And so the end result would be, my colleagues were all going to be affirmative action flunkies. And I recall thinking back in the day, do I want this bullshit? Do I really want this bullshit? Now, it may have been, in the overall scheme of things, given how things turned out. I saw all this diversity and DEI. I saw it as an aberration that was going to pass. The madness was just so intense even back then. I thought, no, this will pass. Another year or two, it'll all be gone. People will wake up to the insanity of it, without realizing that decades later it would even be going to higher. It would be going to levels of excess that I couldn't even have dreamed of back in the day. But I thought, do I want to be surrounded by angry black lesbians and homosexual flunk? I mean, do I really want all that? Is that the? But they were putting some pretty serious money on the table, so I did give it some thought and thought, no, this is insanity. So I walked away from that gig that they were putting on the table and exhorting me to take, by the way, purely on the basis that the insanity and madness of affirmative action DEI was something I couldn't abide. But again, I thought it would pass, just like some storm that raged overhead for a while. And if I'd known it was going to still be around 20, 25 years in the future, I should have taken that, just taken the money and sat there stum and put all the bucks in my pocket. You've been with Tacitus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for listening.